The woman on the beach. The storm had rolled in fast. Waves smashed against the shore, throwing salt and wind through the broken slats of the beach shack. Thunder rumbled above, low and heavy, like the growl of something ancient awakening. Ian Fletcher stood barefoot at the edge of the porch, hoodie soaked, staring out into the chaos. It was supposed to be a quiet night, just him, a bottle of something cheap, and the ocean. But then the sky had torn open. A flash of greenish-blue fire streaked across the clouds, exploding just above the horizon. He'd heard the sound a second later, less like thunder, more like something hitting the atmosphere too fast, too wrong. Curiosity had dragged him outside. Now something else pulled him forward. He grabbed a flashlight, jogged down the dune, boots splashing through wet sand. The wind screamed louder. Then he saw it, a crater, small, fresh, smoldering, just beyond the rocks, and lying at the center, a body. Ian froze. It was a woman, or someone who looked like one. She was sprawled on her side, her skin pale but not quite human, glowing faintly with a soft silver sheen that flickered like dying starlight. Her suit was torn, armor singed, glowing lines along her ribs flickering. One arm was curled protectively over her chest. Her long hair, white as bone, stuck to her face and shoulders. He stepped closer. "Hey, you alive?" No response. He knelt beside her. There was no blood, not even bruising, just the smell of ozone and something strange, like metal and flowers. She was breathing, barely. Her eyes fluttered open, iridescent, luminous, gold. And for a moment, they stared at each other, man and mystery, soaked in storm and silence. Then she spoke. Just one word, whispered like wind through glass. "Run!" Lightning split the sky above, and somewhere beyond the dunes, something answered her. A howl, not human, not close, but coming. Ian didn't ask questions. He pulled her up, light as air in his arms, and staggered back toward the shack, the storm at his back, the impossible in his arms, and the terrifying certainty that nothing in his life would ever be the same again. "She's not from this world." The rain pounded against the tin roof like 1,000 fists. Ian paced his small beach shack, every so often glancing at the figure lying on his old couch. The woman, if she even was one, hadn't moved since he laid her there. He'd stripped off the broken armor with trembling hands, revealing a strange bodysuit beneath, seamless and slightly translucent, like it was made of woven light. Her skin still shimmered faintly, like moonlight trapped beneath water. The glowing lines across her body had dimmed. She looked peaceful now. Beautiful, yes, but also other. Ian crouched beside her. "Hey," he said softly, "you didn't die on me, right?" Her eyes snapped open. Ian fell back with a curse, tripping over a coffee table and landing flat on his back. She sat up in one sharp, mechanical motion. Her golden eyes scanned the room like a radar, then landed on Ian. She stood. Too fast. Too steady. "Easy," Ian said, hands raised. "You're safe. I'm not the one who tried to kill you." She blinked. "You are not hostile." "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me all week." She looked down at herself, then at the room. Her voice was calm but clipped. "This location, Earth, coastal zone, isolated, crude construction, no surveillance grid, limited technological density." She turned to Ian. "You are native." Ian squinted. "You say that like it's a disease." She tilted her head. "Are you injured?" "Me? You're the one that fell out of the sky like a comet on fire." She touched her side where part of her suit had melted. The glowing threads there sparked dimly as if trying to heal. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, her voice was stronger. "I am Avalora, Queen of the Aurelian Dominion. I require temporary sanctuary." Ian blinked. "I'm sorry, Queen, like, of a country? A cult? A Dungeons and Dragons group?" She frowned. "Of the Tri-System Alliance. I rule 6 moons and 2 habitable planets. My claim is contested due to recent treason." Ian let out a slow breath. "Okay, so you're an alien, a royal alien, who just crash-landed on my beach." She nodded. Yes, and someone's trying to kill you. She looked toward the window, storm still raging outside. He will not stop until I am dead, or until the throne is his. And the he in question is Zarek, my former counselor. He betrayed the crown, took control of the military fleet. I escaped during the coronation. Ian rubbed his eyes. Of course you did. She suddenly swayed, catching herself on the arm of the couch. Her skin flickered again, dimmer this time. You need rest, Ian said. Whatever you are, you're clearly not indestructible. My body is regenerating slowly. It would regenerate faster if I were near a solar field or a starlight stream. He gestured at the small space heater. All I've got is electric heat and expired granola bars. She met his eyes. It will suffice. Ian stared at her, unsure if this was a dream, a hallucination, or the world's weirdest dating app success story. But somewhere deep in his gut, something told him this wasn't random. She hadn't just fallen from the sky. She'd landed here on purpose, and someone out there was coming to finish what they started. The assassin arrives elsewhere. Beneath the vast blackness of space, a sleek, obsidian ship descended through the atmosphere like a blade slicing the sky. Silent, precise, deadly. Inside the cockpit, Zarek stood, cloaked in deep violet armor, threaded with crimson veins of energy. His face, once human-looking, now bore faint, fractured lines, like glass hiding something monstrous beneath. His eyes glowed faintly red. A low, growling voice buzzed in his earpiece. Target signal is confirmed. Planet, Earth, hemisphere, Western, life signs, stable. Zarek didn't respond immediately. He gazed through the glass at the blue world below, his voice calm, cold, calculated. She lives, his fingers twitched, and she is weak enough to believe she can hide among primitives. He turned toward the figure beside him, a soldier, tall, armored head to toe in synthetic plating. Its voice was purely mechanical. Orders, Lord Zarek? Zarek tilted his head slowly. Do not kill her. Not yet. He moved to the center of the room, placing his hand on a pulsing orb at the console. A hologram of Avalora appeared, rotating slowly, her energy signature glowing with familiar brightness. She still carries the royal core. He whispered the next words like a lover's regret. I gave it to her once. Then suddenly he clenched his fist, and the hologram shattered. I will take it back, even if I have to rip it from her bones. Back on Earth, the storm had passed. Ian was frying eggs. It felt absurd. But what else do you do when you find out your house guest is an alien monarch on the run? Avalora sat at the window, wrapped in a wool blanket, eyes fixed on the ocean as if reading messages in the waves. Ian flipped an egg. So, your assassin friend. He's not exactly sending flowers, right? Number Zarek's not a man of gestures. He's a man of outcomes. That sound reassuring. She turned, her gaze distant. He was once loyal, fiercely so. He believed in the bloodline. But then, he believed in power more. Ian brought over the plate and slid it across the table. So what's the plan? Wait here until he knocks? Avalora shook her head. Number. He won't knock. She stood. And then, as if summoned by her words, a sound ripped across the sky outside. A sharp sonic boom. Ian ran to the door. Overhead, something streaked through the clouds. A black vessel, triangular, silent despite the impact it left on the air. It circled once, then disappeared into the hills nearby. Ian stepped back inside. I think he found you. Avalora's eyes glowed briefly. Then it begins. She reached into the small containment pod she had hidden beneath the floorboards and pulled out a weapon unlike anything Ian had ever seen. Sleek, pulsing, alive. We have less than an hour before he sends his first unit. Maybe less. What can I do? Avalora looked at him for a long moment. Survive. Ian picked up a crowbar. Okay, cool. We'll improvise. Far away, Zarek stepped onto Earth's surface for the first time. His boots sank slightly into the sand. He looked around, tasted the air. Simple, crude, soft. He turned to his soldiers. Burn what you must, leave no trace. And with that, the hunt began. Reunion with the forgotten guardian. The woods stretched for miles behind Ian's beach shack, thick with pine and mist from the post-storm humidity. The morning sun was only just beginning to cut through the trees, casting long golden shafts of light across the forest floor. But Avalora wasn't admiring the scenery. She moved quickly, barefoot, silent, scanning every inch of the terrain like a predator. Ian jogged a few paces behind, breathless. "You want to tell me where we're going? Or should I keep guessing and gasping?" She didn't look back. There was a failsafe embedded in my escape pod, a distress signal tuned to a single receiver. "Let me guess. Another alien?" "Not just any alien." She stopped abruptly. Ahead, nestled between two moss-covered stones, was a strange device, half buried in the earth. It pulsed with a soft teal light, barely visible. She knelt beside it, pressed her palm to the surface. The device flared to life. A beam of light shot upward into the canopy, pulsing once, twice. Then silence. Nothing happened. Ian frowned. Was that supposed to... A rustling in the trees, a hum, then a shimmer in the air, like heat off asphalt, but vertical. The distortion warped and twisted before snapping into shape, a humanoid figure, tall and armored in shimmering black and gold, emerging from a cloaked portal. He pulled back his hood. Thane. Avalora froze. For the first time since Ian had met her, she looked unsure. Thane stepped forward slowly. "My queen," he said, voice low and reverent. Avalora stood, straight, guarded. "Thane, I didn't know if the signal would reach you." He bowed his head. It never stopped calling, even in exile. Ian stepped forward, hand instinctively on the hilt of a borrowed blade. "Friend of yours?" Thane's eyes flicked to Ian, assessing. "You brought a native." Avalora spoke before Ian could reply. "He saved my life, more than once. He's earned your respect." Thane tilted his head. "My apologies. Earthbloods are not known for survival instincts." Ian raised a brow. "We're full of surprises, especially when we're under attack." Thane turned back to Avalora. "I came the moment I felt the bond flare, but you were supposed to be safe, hidden, not walking into the reach of Zarek's forces." Avalora's expression hardened. "Zarek is here. I felt it before the ship entered atmosphere." Thane's jaw tightened. "Then time is shorter than we hoped." He stepped closer. "You know why I came, my queen. The resistance needs you. The outer colonies are collapsing. The council is gone. You're the last symbol of unity left. You must return." She looked down. "You speak like I still have a throne. You have more than that." His voice softened. "You have people who would die for you, who still believe in you." Ian watched unsilent now. There was something between them. History, weight. Avalora nodded once, slowly, then, "I cannot leave." "Not yet." Thane blinked. "Why?" Her eyes met Ian's. A pause. A beat too long. Thane followed her gaze and understood. Something dark flickered across his face, barely visible. "You've bonded." Avalora didn't answer. Thane stepped back, expression cold. "You would risk our entire world for... him?" Ian bristled, but stayed quiet. Avalora held her ground. "He's more than you realize, and he's part of this now, whether you like it or not." Thane looked at her a moment longer, then turned, cloak snapping behind him. "Very well, then we fight together. But when the time comes..." He looked back at Ian. "I hope you're worth her sacrifice." And he vanished into the trees, as silently as he came. Ian exhaled. "Nice guy." Avalora looked at him, tired, conflicted. "He loved me once. Maybe he still does. But his loyalty to the crown, it always came first." "And what about yours?" Ian asked gently. She looked away. "That's the question, isn't it?" Between two worlds. The sun dipped low behind the hills, painting the shoreline in gold. The wind was calm now, the waves softer, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Ian sat on the porch steps of the beach shack, watching the horizon. Inside, faint voices drifted. Avalora and Thane, speaking in a language that sounded like wind and water braided together. He didn't understand a word, but he understood the tone, memory, strategy, strain. She was a queen, and he was just Ian. When the door opened and Avalora stepped out, Ian didn't turn. He doesn't like me. She stood beside him. He doesn't trust you. That's different. Is it? Ian asked. I mean, he's got reasons. You're his queen. He fought for you, bled for you. Maybe even... He stopped himself. Avalora looked down. He thinks I've forgotten who I am. Have you? That question hung between them. She sat beside him, silent for a moment. I spent my entire life preparing for a throne I never wanted. Every breath was dictated, every smile rehearsed. Then Zarek took it all from me, and for the first time, I was free. She looked at him now, her gaze softer. And I met you. You didn't know what I was. You just helped. Ian chuckled. Yeah, well, you crash land on someone's property. The least you can do is let them make you eggs. She smiled, genuinely, but it faded. Now everything is pulling me back. My people, my name, my war. Ian looked at her, long and searching. So go lead, go fight, be who you were born to be. She blinked, surprised. You're telling me to leave? I'm telling you to choose, he said, because if you don't, Thane will choose for you. Zarek will choose for you. The whole galaxy will. A beat. And what if I want both? Ian smirked. Then you're more human than you think. A silence settled, comfortable, painful. Then, Thane's voice cut through the quiet from inside. You both need to see this. They followed him into the cabin. He stood by a small, flickering projection unit salvaged from Avalora's escape pod. The image showed a spaceport on the other side of the planet, a black ship hovering above it. Zarek had arrived, not with an army, but with a message. The projection crackled, then came to life. Zarek stood tall, face partly shrouded in shadow, eyes burning. Queen Avalora, I offer you peace. Surrender yourself, and Earth will remain untouched. No cities burned, no blood spilled. You have 3 rotations. If you resist, I will wipe this world clean. The message ended. Silence. Thane turned. He's bluffing. He doesn't have the fleet. Avalora's face was unreadable. He doesn't need a fleet. He has the null core. Ian looked between them. That's not good, I'm guessing. Avalora nodded grimly. It's a pulse weapon, ancient, banned. It won't destroy cities. It'll erase the existence of them. Ian stepped forward. Then we hit him first. Thane scoffed. You think this is a war you understand, Earthblood? You don't get to make that call. He's not wrong, Avalora said quietly. This is bigger than any of us. She turned away, and Ian saw something in her that scared him more than any weapon, doubt. So what do we do, he asked. She answered without turning back. We have 3 days to decide which world survives. The secret within Ian. The night was unnaturally quiet, too quiet. Even the sea seemed to hold back its breath. Inside the beach shack, Thane adjusted the perimeter sensors while Avalora stared at an open holographic scroll floating in midair. Images of the null core weapon flickering across its surface. Ian sat alone in the back room, legs bouncing, fists clenched. He could feel it, something inside him. Ever since Zarek's transmission, it had been getting worse. A pulse beneath his skin, a vibration in his blood, like a radio signal no one else could hear. He pressed his palms to his temples. It didn't help. A spark danced across his fingers. His breath caught. Then, a vision. Flashes of light. Avalora on a throne of crystal, a circle of alien symbols surrounding her. A blade piercing darkness. And himself, in the center of it all. He gasped and fell back, hitting the wall hard. Footsteps. Avalora burst into the room, followed by Thane. What happened? Ian looked up, panting. I don't know. Something's wrong with me, or right. I can't tell anymore. Thane stepped forward warily. Explain. Ian opened his hand. A soft glow pulsed in his palm. Faint, golden, not human. Avalora's eyes widened. She crossed the room, knelt beside him. The seal has begun to break. Seal? Ian asked. Thane's voice turned cold. Number. That's impossible. The bloodline was lost. It couldn't have survived. Avalora turned to him. We were wrong. The old blood didn't vanish. It hid. She looked back at Ian. Your DNA carries traces of royal synthesis. Someone, an ancestor, a hybrid, something, passed it to you. You're not just connected to me, Ian. You're connected to the throne. Ian stared at them. Okay, so what does that mean? I'm your cousin? Am I in line for the crown? Thane stepped forward, hand drifting toward his weapon. It means Zarek doesn't need Avalora anymore. He only needs you. Ian stood up fast. And what happens if he gets me? Avalora answered slowly. He activates the null core. Using your energy signature, he can rewrite planetary signatures, burn out Earth as a test, then move on to others. You're the cipher. Ian paced. So what? Kill me and problem solved? Thane didn't blink. Yes. Avalora stepped between them. No. She turned to Ian. There's another way, a ritual, a purge. We can burn the synthesis out of you, but it's risky, painful, and it might kill you. Ian laughed, bitter. Funny how dying keeps coming up as the best option. Avalora stepped closer. If you go with Zarek, he wins. If you die, he wins nothing. But if we remove the cipher without killing you, we have a chance. He looked at her. Really looked. Her expression wasn't that of a queen or a warrior. It was of someone terrified to lose him. What would you do? He asked. I would fight beside you, she said, until my last breath. Thane spoke low. And if he loses control? Avalora didn't hesitate. Then I end it. Ian exhaled. Great. So either I die from a ritual, get murdered by a space dictator, or blow up the planet by accident. He forced a smile. Fantastic odds. Avalora placed a hand on his chest. You don't have to do this alone. Ian nodded. Let's burn it out. Thane turned away, muttering. Fools. All of you. And outside, beyond the hills, Zarek smiled from the shadows, watching the flickers of energy erupting around the shack. He whispered to himself, let them try. He's already mine. Betrayal from within. The sky was bleeding. A thin crimson streak stretched from the horizon, like a crack in the atmosphere. A warning. A wound. Inside the cabin, the ritual had begun. Avalora stood in the center of the room, both hands placed gently over Ian's chest. His eyes were closed, face contorted in pain, sweat pouring down his temples as the energy within him surged like a wild beast trying to break free. Glyphs shimmered in midair, alien sigils glowing gold and silver, dancing around them like fireflies. The air crackled. The floorboards trembled. Thane stood by the door, arms crossed, silent, watching, waiting. Avalora whispered words that hadn't been spoken for generations, phrases encoded with royal resonance, old as starlight. Kareth Volar, Shiranan, Kailmora. The energy within Ian responded, screaming, lashing, a storm of light bursting from his chest. Ian screamed and fell to his knees. Ah! Avalora caught him, barely holding him steady. Stay with me, just a little longer. He gritted his teeth. What is this? It's the cipher tearing loose. It doesn't want to die. From the corner, Thane stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Avalora didn't see the glint of metal in his hand, but Ian did. Avalora, look out! Too late. Thane shoved her aside and lunged, not at Ian's chest, but toward the glowing energy hovering above him. He reached out and slammed a small device into the vortex. Boom! A surge of light, a crack like thunder. Avalora was thrown back, slamming into the far wall. Ian collapsed unconscious, and Thane stood over him, device in hand, eyes glowing faintly red. Avalora coughed, blinking through the haze. Thane, what did you do? He didn't answer. His voice, when it came, wasn't entirely his. I was supposed to protect you, but you chose him. She staggered to her feet, staring at him. No, you weren't compromised. Thane's expression twisted. Anguish, fury, pain, and something deeper. Guilt. I fought it for so long, but Zarek planted the trigger years ago. He knew you'd run. He knew I'd follow. And he knew I'd never let you go. Avalora's heart shattered in her chest. You were the last person I trusted. And that's why he used me. He turned to Ian, unconscious and now pulsing with unstable light. With this device, the cipher is locked. No more purging, no more choices. He belongs to Zarek now. Avalora's voice cracked. Don't do this, Thane. He turned, eyes glowing brighter. I already have. Then, he vanished, activating a phase beacon. The device shimmered, and he disappeared, taking Ian with him. Gone. Avalora screamed, fell to her knees, alone, and somewhere, in orbit above Earth, aboard Zarek's flagship. Ian opened his eyes in a containment field, and Zarek stood over him. Welcome, Cypher. You've brought me everything I need. Beneath the ocean's edge, thunder rumbled over the ocean as Avalora's ship cut low across the waves, disappearing beneath the surface with a silent plunge. She sat in the pilot's seat, her eyes unfocused, jaw clenched, not just from the betrayal, but from the pain of knowing she should have seen it coming. Thane, the one she trusted most, the one who knew every weakness in her armor, and now the one who delivered Ian to Zarek. But this wasn't over, because Avalora still had one card left to play. Beneath the waters of the North Atlantic lay a forgotten facility, the Abyssal Archive, a remnant of a war fought thousands of years ago by species that had long since vanished into myth. It was the last place on Earth that still responded to her royal signal. Avalora activated the submersible cloak. The sea outside shimmered, glowing plankton scattering as the ancient metal doors slowly creaked open before her. She descended. The ship docked inside a vast pressurized chamber, a domed cathedral of glowing coral metal architecture, pulsing faintly with forgotten energy. She stepped out, alone. Her boots echoed across the floor as ancient lights flickered on in response to her presence. In the center of the room sat the archive core, a living memory bank encoded with quantum starlight. It recognized her immediately. Avalora, last of the royal line, the voice echoed, both mechanical and mournful. Query, why have you come? She spoke clearly. I need to override the cipher lock Zarek has placed on Ian Fletcher, and I need access to the coordinates of the original null core cradle. The core pulsed. Coordinates classified. Cipher override requires bloodline validation, an emotional anchor. Avalora hesitated, then stepped forward. She slid her palm with her own blade, pressing it against the interface. Blood ran down the console, silver blue, shimmering. Validated, the core responded. Emotional anchor required. Speak. Avalora took a breath, deep, steady, and then, softly, she began to speak. He is not like us. He's flawed, terrified, mortal. But when I fell, he held out his hand. When I broke, he never asked for pieces. He simply stayed. She looked up, voice shaking now. He reminded me that leadership is not power. It's choosing to protect something that might never understand you. And that love is not weakness. It's the only reason worth fighting. The archive went silent. Then, a burst of light. Coordinates appeared across the chamber walls. Zarek's ship, its location, its defenses, and a transmission, a live feed. Ian, strapped to a table, locked in a containment field, eyes closed, pulse flickering erratically. Zarek stood nearby, preparing the null core device. Begin extraction, he commanded. Avalora clenched her fists. You're not taking him. She turned to the archive core. Activate my armor. Power up the drone fleet. Prepare emergency jump coordinates to orbit. The core hesitated. Risk of death, 87.4%. She narrowed her eyes. Then let's make it count. Moments later, she stood at the heart of the abyssal hangar. Her royal armor shimmered to life around her, forged of crystal alloys and light, a second skin of vengeance and grace. Above her, dozens of sleek, forgotten war drones rose from their dormant pods, waking after centuries, drawn by her presence. She stepped into her ship, now charged with the full might of ancient tech. "I'm coming, Ian." The ocean split open above, and she ascended like a blade through the sky. The final confrontation, low Earth orbit, Zarek's warship, the Dreadspire, hung like a blade in the night sky, its shadow eclipsing the stars, its hull bristling with weaponry, ancient and forbidden. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Ian lay bound in a containment cradle, light pulsing steadily around him. His skin flickered with traces of golden energy, his breath shallow, like something deep inside him was waiting to burst. Zarek stood at the edge of the chamber, arms folded behind his back, calm as ever. "You've done well, Thane," he said. Thane stood at his side, helmet off, face pale but composed. "It wasn't difficult. The human was willing." Zarek smirked. "That's the thing about humans. They surrender when you give them a reason to hope." He stepped toward Ian, voice low. "You feel it, don't you? That power? That longing to become? You're the key, Ian. Not just to my victory, but to your own evolution." Ian opened his eyes. "You don't understand a thing about me." Zarek laughed softly. "I don't need to understand you. I just need to use you." He raised a hand, energy crackling between his fingers, and placed it on Ian's chest. The null core pulsed to life behind them, rising from its containment cradle like a blooming black sun. The chamber lights dimmed. The air rippled. Reality began to bend. Suddenly, a tremor. The ship rocked violently. Lights flickered. Sirens wailed. An alert screamed through the bridge. "Unauthorized breach! Starboard hangar!" Zarek's eyes narrowed. He didn't need to ask. She was here. Exterior. The Dreadspire, hull breach zone. Avalora descended like a meteor, encased in radiant armor of living crystal and fire. Her war drones flanked her in formation, their blue thrusters igniting the darkness. The ship's defense turrets activated, firing streams of plasma into the void. But her fleet weaved through them with impossible precision, one by one ripping through the hull like needles through silk. Inside, chaos. Thane watched the alert screen flicker with her signature. Zarek turned to him. "Go. Delay her." Thane hesitated, then nodded and walked into the storm. Interior, core chamber. Avalora tore through the corridors like a force of nature. Drones flanked her sides, clearing the path as she struck down guards with blade and pulse fire. She wasn't fighting to survive. She was fighting to reclaim what was hers. At the final corridor, Thane stepped into view. No armor, just a blade. She stopped. So did he. "Step aside," she said. Thane didn't move. "He made me do it." "Then unmake it." His grip tightened on the blade. "You love him." She raised her weapon. "And I would die for him. Would you?" Thane hesitated. For a moment, the fury in his face cracked, revealing the man beneath. The soldier. The protector. He lowered his sword. "Go." Avalora passed him without another word. Interior. Core activation room. Zarek stood before the now glowing null core, its energy flooding the chamber. Ian was suspended midair, surrounded by spiraling runes and light. He was barely conscious, whispering her name. "Avalora!" Zarek turned as the blast doors opened. She entered like vengeance made flesh. He smiled. "Finally. Let him go." "You're too late. He's already mine." She stepped forward. "Then I'll take him back." Zarek raised his hand, and the battle began. Light and shadow collided. His dark energy arced like spears. She deflected them with sweeping blades of pure light. The chamber shook. Consoles exploded. Ian fell to the ground, gasping. Avalora reached him. Zarek screamed in fury, rushing her in a final strike. She turned and drove her blade into the core. Boom! A surge of raw energy engulfed the room. Zarek screamed, his body breaking apart as the core collapsed in on itself, taking him with it. Avalora pulled Ian into her arms, shielding him. And then, silence. The core imploded. Zarek was gone, the weapon destroyed. Minutes later, the ship's systems rebooted. Emergency lights flickered back on. Ian stirred, eyes opening slowly. She was holding him. You came for me, he whispered. Avalora smiled, bruised and breathless. I always would. He touched her face, still glowing faintly. Is it over? She looked around, then nodded. For now. A throne lost, a home found 3 weeks later. The stars above Earth were unusually clear. No storms, no satellites passing, just a stretch of infinite quiet. The kind of sky you could fall into. Ian stood on the porch of the rebuilt beach shack, a mug of coffee in hand, staring out at the ocean like he was still waiting for something to crash from the sky. But tonight, there was no warship, no invasion, no fire, only waves and her. Inside, Avalora stood barefoot on the wood floor, hair loose, dressed in a simple cotton shirt and jeans that still confused her. She ran her fingers along the edge of a bookshelf as if it were some ancient relic. This place is peaceful, she said softly. Ian turned. It's boring, he replied, but peaceful usually is. She walked out to join him, stepping into the cool evening air. They wanted me to return, to rebuild Kareth, sit on a throne that doesn't exist anymore. Ian sipped his coffee. And you said no? I said, not yet. A long silence, the kind that didn't ask for anything but presence. Then Ian smiled. You ever think it's weird? A queen of 2 planets living in a shack with a guy who once got fired from a hardware store for mislabeling copper wire? Avalora tilted her head, amused. Titles mean nothing here. You don't treat me like royalty. You make me eggs and hand me coffee. High honors, she laughed quietly. Maybe this is what I needed, a home that doesn't ask me to be anything but alive. Ian looked at her, more serious now. Do you miss it? The power, the responsibility, the fight? She considered. Sometimes, but not the way I miss quiet mornings, or salt in the air, or you when you're not in the room. He reached for her hand. They stood together, listening to the tide. Far above them in low orbit, a beacon pulsed. Her last connection to Kareth, to the people rebuilding what was lost. It would wait, because for now the queen was home. Not in a palace, not on a throne, but here, with him.